For too long, domestic violence has been an invisible epidemic, hidden behind closed doors, misunderstood, and too often dismissed. At the S.E.E.N Summit, we believe every story deserves to be heard, every survivor deserves to be believed, and every person has the power to make a difference. Together, we are disarming domestic violence by shining a light on what's been unseen. With each episode, we are building awareness, deepening understanding, and creating space for healing and change. This is the S.E.E.N Summit Podcast, making the invisible visible, one conversation at a time.
All right, Nadia, welcome to our first ever S.E.E.N Summit Podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited I get to be a part of this.
I'm so grateful that you're here. If there's a person that can just turn on a fire hose of information about domestic violence and really just get us into a deep dive of what it is that we're talking about through all of these things, it's you. So I'm so glad.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. For everybody who's joining us, it's our first episode that we're doing in this way. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Nadia. Nadia Van Atter is the Assistant Director at the Judson Family Justice Center, which is located in Pierce County, Washington. She received her Bachelor of Arts degree from Pacific Lutheran University and has spent 16 years working at the CJFJC, both as community partner and directly with the foundation. Nadia's experience includes working as an advocate, coordinating and facilitating an educational support group for DV survivors and their children, developing and implementing a self-sufficiency program for survivors, partnership building, and training. She regularly provides training to a wide array of community organizations, including law enforcement, medical personnel, child protective services, advocates, and other community members on the dynamics of domestic violence, how to support loved ones, and self-care. She has partnered with UW and UWT around research and publications on domestic violence. Nadia lives with her husband and their very vocal cat, Mimi, in central Tacoma, Washington. And her spare time, she enjoys snowshoeing, reading, eating sushi, attempting to garden, and going on urban hikes.
It's really funny to hear, I read about the things that I'm doing.
And then what this doesn't have, because this is from some time ago, is your new addition to your title. What are you doing at the Judson Family Justice Center now?
I am currently serving as the Interim Director.
That's right. And I keep just referring you as the king of the Judson Family Justice Center.
Yes.
But Interim Director, I guess, is the professional title.
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, I wanted to just get jumping off and answer the biggest question, which I think probably surrounds domestic violence. So tell us, Nadia, what is domestic violence?
Domestic violence is a pattern of behaviors where one person engages in these behaviors to maintain that imbalance of power and that power and control in the relationship. And what's really hard about domestic violence is when we think about it, we really think of those visual things that we see. Right? Someone has a black eye, a mark, or they have a broken bone, something that's really visual. What we don't think about is all of these other behaviors that create that environment of fear. And so if you think about that picture of the iceberg where you see the water line and kind of the tip of the iceberg, what we think about as domestic violence is just that tip, right? It's what we can very clearly see. What we don't understand and think about is everything underneath the waterline. And that's going to include things like verbal and emotional abuse, which is gaslighting someone, making them doubt their sense of self. It's going to include things like financial control and financial abuse. And this ranges from controlling someone's access to education, controlling someone's access to their own money, to, causing credit, impacting their credit, maybe causing someone to get evictions on their records, that type of thing. We see this happening through reproductive justice and taking away someone's right to decide, what they want to do with their body and if they want to get pregnant or not. We see this through threats to call CPS or call the police if a survivor leaves with kiddos. We see this through intimidation, through isolation. And isolation is one, like all of them, that can be really manipulative, right? That could be I'm physically preventing my partner from leaving and telling them they can't leave the house. But maybe I'm doing things that are making it really hard for them to engage in their community that makes it to feel like where they can't go spend time with their family or friends. And what we see is we see all of these pieces really lean into each other, and it systematically isolates survivors from their resources and options, keeping them dependent on the person that's causing harm.
Wow. That is a heck of a thorough definition. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
So I'm hearing a lot of different things. I'm hearing that number one, it's not just visible elements, that other things are indeed classified as domestic violence beside the physical. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And then the other thing that I'm hearing is, I think you said a couple other different subcategories of abuse, like emotional abuse, financial. So is it that domestic violence is kind of an umbrella wherein these other types of abuse fall under that same category?
Yeah. So domestic violence includes all of those behaviors. And it also includes things like physical and sexual violence. And there's the power and control wheel, which is something that you can Google, you can pull up different versions of it. But the power and control wheel was developed by providers that worked with both survivors and the individuals causing harm. And while every situation is unique and everyone is coming to the table with different lived experiences and experiencing different kind of twists on this and exactly how that kind of settles out, the power and control wheel is a really good visual that breaks down those different type of tactics that people causing harm will use. So the idea is isolation is a tactic, verbal and emotional abuse is a tactic, financial abuse is a tactic, threats and intimidation are another tactic, if that makes sense. Of it really kind of gives a good way to look at all of the different realms of life that domestic violence impacts. Because I think that's something we also don't think about is domestic violence isn't an isolated incident that's going to impact one area of my life, right? It's going to impact all areas because, again, it's cutting a survivor off from their resources and options and making them dependent on the person that's causing harm. Hopefully that clarified that a little more.
Yeah. And something that you said caught my attention, which is what we see is the tip of the iceberg. So, what can you tell me about if we are seeing signs of domestic violence? What is the implication of that for the amount of abuse or the levels of abuse that are probably going on that we're not seeing?
There's probably a ton more. The things that we tend to see are going to be those physical markers, right? That there's been some type of physical violence. You might witness, the person causing harm being really controlling in those situations. But if that's what's being seen in public or within our communities, then just imagine what's happening at home when no one's there to witness it, right? And so if you're seeing red flags, there's probably a lot more that's going on at home that other folks can't see.
And so, what would you say to someone then who would say something along the lines of, oh, no, I've seen their relationship dynamic. He just has this kind of personality, or she, or whoever the harm doer in that situation might be. That's just kind of how he talks. Or I've seen them do that. So that must just be a part of that person. It's not concerning.
I would still try to challenge that, and I would be concerned about that, right? Because and maybe it is someone that really struggles to communicate that way to everybody. But my guess would be is there's still something going on that can't be seen. And one of the things that's really challenging is if we know the survivor, it means we probably also know the person that's causing the harm. And that's a really hard thing to grapple with, right? Because it's fine to say, like, oh, yeah, I have a friend that's a survivor, but who wants to say, oh, yeah, my friend's the person over here causing harm and is being the one who is the one that's being abusive, right? Nobody wants to think that way. And so I think when we see these things, it's really often to say, oh, that's just how they behave. It's not a big deal, right? But if I'm seeing that behavior, what I would do is I would, in a space that is safe, that I know it's just the survivor, or just the person that I'm concerned about being harmed, is, again, making sure it's away from other people. Other folks can't hear this, but just saying, like, I've noticed some things, maybe about how your partner treats you, or I saw this and it made me concerned. And I just wanted to check in, to see how you're doing, let you know that I care about you and you deserve to be safe. And I'm here if you need me.
I love that. And I want to go back to what you were saying, where if you're knowing both people, because in an intimate partner relationship, likely the friends are mutual acquaintances, at least, if not mutual friends or family members and those types of things. And so if you're looking at the fact that I've got a relationship with both of these people, do you think that lends to why survivors are so often disbelieved if they do disclose abuse?
I think that's one of the reasons, right? Like, people, I think, can be very well intentioned, but they don't want to get involved. And there's this myth that that is a private family thing, right? Like, if there is domestic violence going on, that is not my issue. That's a private thing going on between that couple. So I think that's part of it. But the other reason that survivors often aren't believed, or it's a struggle to disclose those things, is the impacts that the power and control dynamic and those different tactics have. So if you have someone who's gaslighting you and chipping away at your sense of self and making you think that you're crazy and making you doubt yourself and all of these things, and they're telling you that nobody's going to believe you, that makes it really hard to reach out. And so if I know you and your partner and you disclose, and my first response is, oh my gosh, I thought your partner was so amazing, I don't believe it. Like, I may not be meaning to shut you down and cause harm, but I've just reinforced everything that the person causing you harm would have said, right? Nobody's going to believe you. And so being really aware of how we respond is very important. But again, all of those different tactics are leaning into isolating someone from their resources and options. When we talk about isolation on the power and control wheel, you could look at it when it's happening through that manipulative way of, if every time my partner goes out to spend time with their family and friends, I'm blowing up their phone, I'm constantly calling and texting them. And then when they get home, I'm picking a fight and causing a big explosion. After they experience that so many times, it might be really hard for them to go connect with their community, right? They may just decide it's not worth the emotional exhaustion of what happens when they leave and come back, and the harm that I'm causing.
And is that a strategy, Nadia, or do you find that that is commonly seen as inadvertent and just someone being frustrated?
I think it is a strategy, because then if my partner starts to pull away, right, I'm isolating them. It means, who are they going to reach out to? Maybe they don't have as strong of connections within their community. It makes it harder to reach out for help. And then if they do, what kind of response is their community going to have? Is it just going to be like, well, you stopped hanging out with us. You were the one that pulled away, and so it really just amplifies that piece, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And then I'd love to touch too, just since this is going to be our first episode that people are listening to,
Mhm.
and I don't know if everyone who listens is going to come equipped with a foundation in some of these mental health terms like gaslighting. One of the ways I like to describe gaslighting to people is like, you feel confident that you know what a storm is, right? You feel confident that you know what thunder sounds like. You feel confident that you know what rain looks like, that you know what it feels like on your skin or sounds like when it's hitting your window panes. You know exactly what a storm is. And then gaslighting is kind of like, if you were to be looking at rain coming down on your window panes and somebody saying, that's not rain, somebody's just washing the windows. And you're like, but I hear thunder. And somebody's like, you're just imagining that. And you're like, but the weather report said that it's storming. And just every check and balance that you have for understanding that this is a storm that you're experiencing is just counteracted with someone else's replacement of that reality. how else can you help people understand sort of what is gaslighting?
I think that's a really great explanation for it. It's really making someone doubt their sense of self, right? And so, which I think you illustrated so well with that example of you know what rain is, you know what thunder is, and then you have someone telling you the opposite. And one of the things that's really challenging about domestic violence is oftentimes people will say, well, I would never let that happen to me, right?
Yeah.
If my partner told me that that wasn't what rain actually was, I would know what they were doing and I wouldn't put up with that. But oftentimes those behaviors are going to start out really subtle and push those boundaries back little by little. And so as those boundaries get challenged and as you continue to hear it, right, it kind of slowly shifts that idea. And so if you think about it like a funhouse mirror, if we walked into a funhouse mirror right now, we would look at ourselves and we'd be like, oh, we look ridiculous. We know we don't actually have like a 7-foot, oblong head and all of these things. And then we leave and we go home and we look in a regular mirror and we know what we look like. If the only mirror you saw every single day was that funhouse mirror, over time, it really starts to shift how you view yourself. And you would start to say, like, this is what I look like. I don't know that I was going to give a better description than how you described gaslighting.
I think that's a genius description.
But I think that idea of it's pushing those back little by little. So over time, you continue to hear this and you really doubt your sense of self. And then you think about you have someone who's convinced you that rain isn't rain. And then you're out somewhere and it starts to rain and you say, well, no, someone's just washing the windows. And you have people around you going like, what in the world is Mariah talking about?
They do that anyway.
It's raining, right? It makes it really hard to engage in communities. And it also makes it really hard for communities to know how to engage with survivors.
And so I think that's part of what I appreciate so much about the way you describe the control wheel. And we are sitting here, we're talking about one element, which is that gaslighting element. And you've already just shown us how it ties then back into isolation. And so they really do they all just feed into each other?
They really do. When I do presentations around the power and control wheel, that's something I always challenge the audience to think about is don't just think about that one example that I've given. Think about how it's actually leaning into all of the other different spaces in the power and control wheel. Because again, it's not isolated. And it's about systematically cutting someone off from their resources and their options and making them reliant on the person that's causing harm. And so you see all of those things really lean into each other, which makes it really hard to pull apart, which then makes it hard and challenging for survivors to leave because we often hear, I don't understand why someone just doesn't leave. But again, it's all really interconnected and it's made them dependent on someone who's creating that space of fear, that environment of fear, and making them dependent on them.
And that is a great segue into the next question that I wanted to ask is about some of the differences of domestic violence in real life versus what we see portrayed in media, Hollywood, those types of things. And you're talking about leaving. And I will come out and say I did not watch this It Ends With Us movie. The only clip that I've ever seen is of the leaving the harm doer scene. And gosh, it was very confusing as a person who comes from a background of domestic violence to watch someone holding a baby, being passed and forth between them and a harm doer, her lovingly stroking his way too gorgeously curly hair and telling him, it's going to end now. This is going to stop. It ends with us. And that he emotionally just was receptive to that and told the baby how great his mom was. And I stopped myself from flinging something in my room. So can you touch on that a little bit? What, especially surrounding leaving a harm doer, are we misunderstanding through some representations?
I will also preface by saying I have not read the book or watched the movie. So that is where I am coming to this conversation from.
Sorry, Blake Lively. This isn't about you. We haven't seen the whole thing. We're just talking about a clip.
But that is not my experience in hearing stories from survivors. I think one thing that's really important to understand is leaving is hard to do. You've had someone who's cut off your resources and options. Maybe they've sabotaged your ability to have a community. Maybe they've destroyed your credit. They've, prevented you from having education or a work history. They've made you doubt your sense of self, all of these different things, right? So there's plenty of barriers that are a part of that. But in addition to that, when someone leaves, we often see violence escalate. Leaving a domestic violence situation is the most dangerous time. They are trying to break out of a cycle of power and control. And you will often see people causing harm retaliate for that, right? They're starting to lose that control. And so they'll lash out in different ways, maybe become more violent, make additional threats, try to sabotage the survivor's independence and ability to leave in different ways. And so leaving is the most dangerous time. And again, that's on top of navigating all of those other barriers and all of those other challenges, right? If I'm looking at leaving, how do I get into new housing if my partner has destroyed my credit? Maybe I've got an eviction on my record because they sabotaged my ability to pay or said they were paying the rent and didn't. Maybe they have sabotaged my ability to go to school and have a solid work history. Maybe I've got a kiddo. How do I feed my kiddo? How do I get my kiddo to school? Maybe they've sabotaged my community so I don't have support from family and friends, right? And so they're navigating all of that barriers, but leaving, again, is the most dangerous time. And so in my experience working with survivors and hearing the stories of survivors and their journey, I've not spoken with a survivor where they have told me that leaving is that scene.
Is borderline romantic.
But I think what is so important that you bring up in this conversation is how we look at domestic violence in the media in general, right? Like we romanticize red flags, jealousy. That is not healthy in a relationship. If there's jealousy in a relationship, that needs to be something where there is communication and that is addressed and worked on. And I'm not saying that on the side of the survivor needs to work on that, right? The person who is having those emotions needs to do some work around why they are responding and engaging in that behavior. But that is seen as such a romantic thing, right?
And yeah, absolutely. And another thing I think that you help frame is some of the terms. So just to touch briefly, we talk about domestic violence, but intimate partner violence can also be applied as long as, it's somebody that you're in an intimate partner relationship with. Domestic violence, we kind of use those interchangeably. So whether or not somebody is like in the marriage or somebody's dating, it can still be domestic violence. It can still be intimate partner violence. And in the context of those relationships, I think people often seek counseling.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things you're talking about, like, oh, my husband and I, my wife and I, my girlfriend, boyfriend, partner, whomever, like there's this jealousy there. We need couples counseling in order to get through that. Do you find that that is usually a good course of action, or is it like you were saying, and it's more someone who's experiencing that anger or that jealousy or that possessiveness needs to do some work on that in and of itself?
I think couples counseling is a really great tool in an equitable relationship, right? In a relationship where there's not the power and control dynamic. That is not a safe thing to do in a domestic violence relationship because there's that imbalance of power. Counseling or therapy should be a safe space. If a survivor goes into a couples counseling with their partner that's causing harm, you've got a couple things that could happen. You could have either they're not going to disclose what's going on because fear of what happens when I get home because I've now talked about these behaviors and what they're doing, which then means oftentimes we see the person causing harm will just take that time and say like, well, let me tell you everything that's wrong with my partner because I'm this perfect person over here, right? So it's not a safe space to do. So when we're working with survivors and they identify that they want support around that, we really try to talk about like, if you want support for you, you do support for you, but it's not safe to do couples counseling because couples counseling should be a safe space, and it's not when there's that imbalance of power.
Thank you so much for touching on that. I'm realizing that it would take me probably 19 hours of interrogating you to actually get through the 4 questions that I had a goal of getting through because so many of
So
these are not on my list.
it just means we get to do more than one of these.
Ugh, I love talking to you. So, how can a person identify if what they're going through is an annoying relationship trait or if it's abusive?
I feel like there's a lot to unpack with that. So I'll try to keep like a condensed answer and like send to some possible resources around that. I think the big thing is, can you disagree with your partner without being afraid of something happening? And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's physical violence, right? Like, can you disagree with your partner without fear that there's going to be, you know, emotional or verbal abuse? Can you disagree with your partner without feeling like you're going to be called names or torn apart and that type of thing? So I think that would be one way to look at is this a challenge that my partner and I are having and we are on equal footing and we are like talking through and hashing things out? Because we're not going to agree with everything that our partners do, right? Like we are human. We all have different perspectives. We have different ideas. And so it's okay to disagree and that type of thing. But do you feel safe in doing that? Now, I mentioned the power and control wheel before. You can also Google this, but they have a copy that's called the equality wheel that has the same spokes on it. But instead of talking about those unhealthy behaviors, it talks about what healthy versions of that would be, right? So, you're negotiating your feelings and emotions and disagreements with your partner, right? You both have access to finances. Maybe one person takes the lead on them, but the idea is that I still know what's in my bank account. I can still access those funds, right? It's not all just in one person's name or they don't have sole control over it, right? So I think that can be a really good way, to look at those behaviors. And then in our brochure that we use at the Family Justice Center, we have healthy and unhealthy relationship traits. And if you Google those, tons of websites will have those and they will pop up. But that can also be a really nice way that lays out side by side what some of those red flags are and what the opposite is. And so that can be a healthy thing to look at as well, to take a look at those.
And I think it's so great that you're talking about different resources to look at because like you already touched on, those things are kind of contrary to what we see and what we romanticize in books and movies. I think we could do like a whole episode probably just on that. But what about breaking the cycle of abuse? We've talked about this control and power wheel and how it sort of just keeps feeding into itself. And then we also talked about how leaving is the most dangerous time. So, what are some of the primary incentives for leaving that you've encountered?
Okay.
And then also, what are some tools that are important to know for breaking those cycles?
I feel like that's a little bit of a hard question to answer. So bear with me while I kind of like bumble my way through this. And it's hard because every person's journey and story is different, right? And they're coming from very different backgrounds and lived experiences and feeling like they have different options. I mean, you deserve to be safe in your relationship, right? You shouldn't be terrorized in your own home. Kiddos should grow up in safe households where they're seeing, healthy relationships and that type of thing. So I think that's just kind of a very general one to throw out there, right? Of like, people deserve to be safe in their homes. Everybody's motivation for leaving or their final, maybe feeling like their final successful step at leaving it's going to be different for everybody. Some survivors will say, my kids were seeing this and I didn't want them to see this anymore, right? But for other survivors, they'll say, I'm really afraid to leave because I know if I'm there and my partner escalates, I know what I'm willing to do to step in and protect them. What happens if we get divorced and they're over for a visit? what's going to happen if my ex escalates? Who's going to take care of them? And so everybody's individual stories are going to be different on that. But the reality is everybody deserves to be safe in their home. It's not okay that their partner is engaging in these tactics and causing harm, whether there's physical violence present or not. It's not okay. To survivors, I would say there are resources and there's help available, right? And that is going to look like a different process for everybody. For some people, it might be really leaning on their faith communities. For other people, it might be coming in to formalize services like we have at the Family Justice Center or one of the other community partners in the area. For some folks, that might be feeling like they want to call the police, and file a police report. For some people, it might be feeling that they want to file a court order and start that process. It's really going to look different for everybody. But I would tell survivors, you deserve to be safe. There are resources available. And the resources that are out there we're not going to tell you what to do. We want to give you resources and options so you can make the decision that's best for you and figure out what process is best for you.
And one of the things that you said even really early on as we were having this discussion was your, I don't want to say scripting because it didn't come across as premeditated, but your reaction to a person who was in theory disclosing abuse was you deserve to be safe. And it was very affirming. And I noticed that it wasn't a lot of instruction giving. There's something to be said for that. Is that intentional?
Yes. And I'm very happy you brought that up. Yeah. I can't tell someone what steps to take, right? Because there are so many different variables in their life. I don't know all of the details. And so as a loved one, it's important that, I am saying things like, I care about you. You deserve to be safe. I'm here if you need me. If you need help connecting to resources, I'm here to do that. But it's not helpful if I step in and say, okay, Mariah, here's what you need to do. You have to go do X, Y, and Z, and then you're going to do this, and you're going to do this. That's not helpful for two reasons. One, I don't know all of the little things going on behind the scene that you know about, right? Like you are the expert of what's going on in your life. The other thing is that's then putting me in the position, again, of telling you what to do, and you're not getting to make those decisions, and you're already navigating someone telling you what to do and taking away your resources and options and autonomy. And so if I step in and suddenly tell you all the things you have to do, I'm doing something similar. Even though it's well-intentioned, right? I may mean it as, your friend and I'm trying to be supportive, but that's not actually helpful.
And so I guess to wrap up for the first of what I hope are many conversations to help people either as loved ones or survivors who are going through this kind of thing, but what is a good first step if you're a loved one, if you're concerned, or if abuse has already been disclosed? What's a good first step?
So believe them, right? Like that's really important. And I think learning about domestic violence is really important so that when someone discloses, and statistically, we know someone who's a survivor, right? Like if you look at those numbers, depending on the study that you're looking at, 1 in 3 women, 1 in 7 men, 54% of trans and non-binary individuals experience DV in their lifetime. So the unicorn that navigates life that truly doesn't know anybody who's been impacted by this would truly be a unicorn, right? Like those numbers, we all know somebody who's experienced it. And so learning about it is really important because that way when someone discloses, you have a better idea of how to respond. And so the first thing is just believing someone. So if I tell you that there's domestic violence happening, right? You can say, thank you for sharing that with me. I believe you and you deserve to be safe, right? It doesn't even have to be like, here is how we are going to fix it right now. It's just acknowledging what I'm saying and believing me. Because people who are causing harm, one of the things they're doing is they're saying nobody's going to believe you. Nobody cares about that. And so you saying, I believe you and I care about you is balancing back that funhouse mirror, right?
Yes. Yes.
Which
That's a big thing. And in the acronym that we came up with for S.E.E.N, that was the very first one is the S, take the disclosure seriously. And we've talked, I think, about a lot of the understandable reasons, right, that we unknowingly shut survivors down or dismiss things or minimize things. And oftentimes it is someone, who does love you, who's doing it, but it's maybe because they also know that other person and their brains are automatically thinking, oh, him? No, um, it it does take the education piece. It does take really understanding all of the things that you've given us today about what domestic violence is and how many different tactics there are, how many different strategies, how so much of it is happening in addition to what's being seen if there's something visible already. And so I think that's a great jumping off point. And then you had mentioned already, if you're a survivor, we can't really give out a step-by-step program that just wouldn't work safely or be effective. Mm, What is your hope then for what is available to a survivor if they're needing to navigate an abusive scenario?
I would hope that they would connect to a domestic violence agency in their area and connect to an advocate. I can speak for Washington because I am in Washington, but community advocates in Washington state are confidential, which means what's told to us does not get reported to law enforcement. There are certain mandated reporting requirements around child abuse, elder abuse, and self-harm. But when a survivor comes into our agency and meets with me or someone else on our team, what they're telling to us stays with us. And then from there, we're here to talk about what does safety look like in your situation? What are different resources and options? What do you want to do? And I think that is something that's really important to remember as a loved one that can sometimes be hard to remember, but it's important. You've got to let the survivor make their own decisions. And sometimes when they disclose, they may be in a space where they're saying, I'm ready to leave now, and this is what it looks like. And sometimes they may disclose, but they may not be ready to leave. They may not feel like they have resources or options. Oftentimes, people causing harm are going to say things like, I'm so sorry. I'm going to change. It won't happen again. And that's really hard. And that's a part we didn't even get to dive into this time.
Yeah.
So to be another conversation. But that's one of the other things that makes it so challenging is even though harm is happening, the person causing harm may say things like that as a way to pull the survivor back in. And then the harm is going to happen again. Right. And so sometimes when someone discloses, or even when someone comes in and connects to an advocate, I've worked with people where they say, like, I get that what is happening is abusive, but I'm not sure that I'm ready to leave right now. Or they've said that they're sorry and that they're going to change. And I want to believe them. Right. And so as family members and friends and loved ones, it's important that we remember that of like believing the survivor, letting them make their own choices, and knowing that sometimes when they disclose, they're not quite ready to leave yet. And that's okay. We're still there to provide support. We're still there to say we care about you and we're here, whatever your journey looks like.
Yeah. And it's not that I want to endorse this, but I just want to point out to people who are listening who are like, yeah, I mean, you can't blame me for wanting to protect them. We know, like we don't. But I think what we're saying is although every instinct is going to say fly in there like Batman, Gotham needs you, like come to the rescue, that you, even on your very best day, you're not equipped to play that role because you are not the person in the scenario. It's like you said, there's so many dynamics at play that we, as anyone who is not the person actually in it, are not going to know. We're not going to understand barriers. We're not going to see potential pitfalls of our recommended actions that we just can't foresee. And so I think that really is, it's an important component to try to remind ourselves to take off the protector hat and put on a supporter mentality.
Which can be hard to do. on our website, we have a 10 ways brochure that we developed a number of years ago. There was many advocates who had been doing this work for many, many years that collaborated on this. And this brochure was developed as a combination of their experience working with survivors and their experience working with family members and friends supporting survivors. And I'll tell you, if I know someone in my personal life that's experiencing domestic violence, I have to pull out that brochure and look at it as a reminder for myself. And I do this work, right? Because when it's a loved one experiencing it, you want to like swoop in there to be like, I'm going to save this person. I'm going to fix everything. And so I have to take a peek at that brochure to remind myself, like, this is what my role is as a loved one. This is how I can best support someone. You know, these choices are up to them, but I'm here to offer resources. I'm here to say I care about you. I'm here to say, you deserve to be safe and those types of things. It can be hard to remember though.
Yeah. And the other thing I noticed about the dialogue that you use when you're talking about somebody who's disclosing abuse is it's almost all questions. I notice it's almost all questions. It's not a lot of directives. Well, what is it that you want to do? What are your goals? What part can I play in this for you? And then the only real statements that I heard are affirming reality, affirming self, affirming basic human rights and needs, being safe, being seen. And so I think that that's really powerful. Just even looking back on my own journey, I think the most impactful thing that someone ever did for me was ask me questions. And the one that I'm thinking of was just a therapist that kept asking me the question, do you feel like you're being abused? And it was never, that's abusive. It took so long for it to come through to me. But just that question continuing to show up was, and do you feel like you're being abused? The questions are powerful. We listen to ourselves a lot more, I think, than other people sometimes.
Right. I appreciate you sharing that. Like, I think that's really powerful for people to hear, right? Because it's one thing to have providers providing that information, but I think it's incredibly powerful for people to hear from survivors, right? That's like, no, this is really what's supportive. This is what was supportive in my journey and in my process. So I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you.
You're sweet. No, it's it really is. Even when I listen to my own like recounting of things that happened, it's counterintuitive to what if I'm now looking at trying to help other people navigate these situations to what I feel I should be doing. It's counterintuitive. But I mean, I remember it happening. I remember people saying things like, I just can't believe he does that, or that's just so terrible. And what it would actually wind up doing is sparking a defensive response in me, like, oh my gosh, I need to make sure I scramble and make him look like some glorious, wonderful being, or they're not going to want to be around, or people aren't going to want to hang out with us. And it bred into that isolation, like you're talking about, where it's like, oh, well, I just need to make sure, they're not around that much, or I need to make sure they don't see us together very much, or point out all of the ways that he's actually amazing. This is actually amazing.
Which I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I think that is such an important thing for people to understand. And this can be really hard as a loved one, right? But if you disclose, and I know both of you, and my first response is, oh my gosh, what a jerk, and I just go on and badmouth your partner, then that suddenly puts you in that position of feeling like you have to defend them. And that can make it a lot more challenging the next time you disclose or feel like you reach out, because maybe I've done all this bad mouthing and now you're like, I don't want Nadia to know any more about this, right? Or maybe that makes you feel like you're suddenly embarrassed because you're in that. And so it's really important as loved ones that we remember it's not supportive if we jump in and they're like, okay, I'm going to go slash their tires and like call them all these names, right? It's not about that. It's about, what can I do to support you? You deserve to be safe. I care about you, and I'm here for you.
That is an amazing summation, I think, of everything that we've talked about today. I can't believe that I've taken up a whole hour already. And we only got through a couple of planned questions, but like 9,000 extra ones. But you've given me so much to think about, so much information, and I'm just so grateful for everything that you shared. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for doing this. I appreciate it. It was good to see you and chat.
Yes. And before we go, I want to just end on something a little bit more lighthearted, because as people come together to hold up these heavy topics, I just think it might be nice to know. So what's one thing, Nadia, that you do working in such an emotionally taxing arena to take care of yourself?
Ooh, that's a good question because self-care is so important. I think for me, movement is really important. And so trying to make sure that I'm giving some level of movement in. And for people who know me, they know that I'm a little bit of a lazy person. So movement for me is not going to be like going and running a marathon. Movement is going to be like doing a little walk around the park. So that is really important to me, and really leaning into members of my community that are supportive, right? Of just like making sure that I'm carving out time for people that I care about and that care about me, and really fostering those relationships. And sometimes you just need like an evening to like curl up with some tea and watch some like trash TV.
Love that. Yeah. So many strategies for
Yes.
getting through this work. Great.
Depends on the day.
All right. Thank you so much, Nadia.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for being a part of the S.E.E.N Summit. The movement to end domestic violence starts with you. Keep tuning in, because when we come together, we are disarming the monster that is domestic violence of its most terrifying weapon, its invisibility. We are a community of survivors, loved ones, and leaders together making the invisible epidemic seen. Please share what you've learned today with others. When you subscribe, like, or share this podcast, you help us to reach more individuals and organizations who can make a difference. We'll see you next time at S.E.E.N Summit.